Hey, welcome to another Streaming Friday on Reclaim TV. Today, Reclaim Hosting would like to welcome a very special guest. How does that sit with you, Timmy? A
It
very
does not.
special guest.
That's right. Lay it on thick. Lay it on thick.
I mean, it's just weird to announce you as a guest at anything Reclaim Hosting. That's a trip for me.
It
So,
does. It does. And
so
then we were just talking earlier. It feels weird to be at this table because this was definitely the area that I worked in during the COVID. This was my COVID office essentially. So
absolutely.
just
Yeah,
happened to be that it worked out to be here. It was like, wow, okay,
a
it's
little bit of a
interesting.
streaming flashback, if you will.
Right. Totally.
But speaking of retro and flashbacks, you have been running with great acumen and had a really great run the last 3.5 years, Reclaim Arcade. And
Sure.
for those who don't know, it's a retro arcade in Fredericksburg, and it is the best arcade in North America, probably beyond. It's truly beautiful. So that's a cool thing. I can see the shirt you got that you're representing.
But I'm still representing the other side too. I keep a balance here for sure, always. For
Beautiful,
life
yeah.
means in all the
My
things.
dog broke my Reclaim EdTech cup.
Mine has a chip in it, but I'm holding on to it. So I just, you know, little cuts here and there, but they're worth it. They're
You're
worth it,
bleeding
damn it.
for Reclaim.
Exactly.
So it's actually a good segue because both the shirt and the cup and in general, the idea of marketing for whether it be Reclaim Hosting, whether it be Reclaim Arcade, they're two different entities, two different approaches, I'm sure, in many ways. But one of the things I think everyone has felt is the kind of splintering of various networks, right?
Hmm.
Like where there were some networks, whether it be Twitter, whether it be Reddit, not that was necessarily a network you would use, but many of the big networks, many of the big places you would go have whether become too toxic or just kind of not working with maybe one style. And so there's been a kind of a splintering, if you will, of that stuff. And you've always used Facebook to great effect. And that's always been a kind of big space for you to bring in people.
For better or worse, right? I
Yeah,
mean, to
but
your point.
I
But
think
yeah.
for it's like Reclaim Hosting would be a little bit weird on Facebook, right?
Right.
Saying
Yeah,
reclaim your
exactly.
network, right? Like whereas the arcade, I don't think it doesn't have the same impact. That's not what you're selling. You know what I
No.
mean? So
Yeah, I think that's what's fascinating for me with this transition. What it's been is where your communities, and to your point, I see the academic community was really big on Twitter, right?
mhm.
And then of course Twitter blew up, and now it's Mastodon, but it's Bluesky, I guess is how you pronounce it, or whatever, or wherever they might be. But that splintering effect. And whereas on the arcade side, it's how do you reach the local community and
Yeah.
what's working there? And to some degree it is Facebook and Instagram, but not always, even still, right?
I've been fascinated, speaking of your marketing, there's Facebook, Instagram, but also, from what I understand, you've become a bit of a local media mogul through radio, of all things. So
Right.
you've done more than your fair share of radio commercials. Is that right?
I do. Every couple months, I'll go over to the radio station and record some new bits for them, just about events that we have going on and stuff. We have a little jingle. And yeah, it's funny. I've had people come up to me, friends of mine who are like, man, I was literally going to pick up Mexican food, walk into the building, and then I hear you talking on the radio. And I'm just taking a double take or whatever. And I'm like, that's cool.
There's one I heard where you're like, Yahoo! It's.
Hmm. I feel like anytime I record those, the radio people are like, I need you to pretend you had five more cups of coffee, because it's just all you have
Yeah,
is audio in that sense to get through, and you can't just talk like I'm talking right now. It's got to be all
totally.
wah, 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 all that craziness. So I'm like,
So
okay, well, let me try again.
how have you found radio has worked for you when we talk about the local piece? Because we're going to talk a bit about marketing across several things. Like, what's
Sure.
been your take on radio?
It's been, it's very hard to track that, I think. It's very hard to track a lot of marketing efforts, right?
Yeah,
It's everything, when it's an email newsletter or something like that, you can track clicks and opens and stuff. When it's not digital and it's awareness, that becomes a lot harder. And even if somebody did come to our space because they heard it on the radio, they're not always going to say, "Oh yeah, I heard
Yeah.
about you all on the radio." It's an awareness. It's they knew about us because they were driving, and then maybe a month or two later, they were not busy on a Friday and decided, "Oh, why don't we go to that arcade thing?" They
Totally.
didn't make that connection between the two, and so it's near impossible to track that stuff. And so some of it is a sort of leap of faith that it's working, um, for sure. And I think it is, that there's certainly way more awareness of who we are now, 3.5 years into this than there was when we first began.
Yeah.
And your marketing effort changes because of that too, right? At first, it's just this is who we are. Now it's like people know about us. It's what's going on. Like what
Yeah.
are
What
new
have you done for
games?
me lately?
Yeah, exactly, right. Like, like when we have karaoke and other events and things, getting
Yeah.
reminding people not only are we still here, but that we have like new stuff going on all the time and giving them a reason to maybe come back, even if they've been there before. Whereas in the beginning, it was just like, who the hell is Reclaim Arcade? Like that's a very different
Yeah.
type of marketing.
But that's interesting too because you've been like so when you have things like you know, emo night or like when you go on the radio, right? Or when you
Hmm.
do targeted messaging like that, do you pick a particular event or do
Hmm.
you just try and sell the arcade as you know, as a thing apart from all the different because it seems like the different events start to get more granular. So you
Right.
would have to go to where people already are, like Facebook, and then hit
Sure.
them with the different events.
Yeah.
Would you do that on radio or no?
A lot of times, it's sort of a mix. So, like, if I'm talking about emo night, it's like, come on out to emo night, put on your black eyeliner and your lipstick, and come on out. Like, so I am trying to reach them, but I'm reminding people on pretty much all across all channels and everything. Like, how cool is this? 75 plus arcade and pinball machines, all on free play. We've got beer, wine, cider. We've got an awesome food from our on-site food truck. So, like, I'm reminding people about the other reasons that don't ever change, in
Yeah,
addition to couching it in here's what's happening this Friday.
yeah,
And then, of course, like, we do have sometimes where we don't have an event going on. I mean, we do stuff pretty much every week, but there are sometimes where it makes more sense to run what we call like a generic bumper or whatever, which is really just, talking about the arcade itself. And so sometimes, in a given month, there might be a week where it's just our generic radio that talks about who Reclaim Arcade is.
gotcha. So you have both targeted
Yeah.
and generic.
Yeah.
So it reminds me, I'm rewatching Breaking Bad right now, and one of the things I'm in season
Okay.
two, like episode wherever, and one of the things it reminds me is Better Call Saul's advertising campaigns. And
Okay.
his whole TV ads, which are so cheesy and people make fun of it, but like there's something really compelling about like that kind of advertising, like say video, but like it's very hard in some ways to imagine a TV unless you're a huge brand to
Yeah.
imagine like TV targeted stuff. Now you're talking about targeted ads on Google maybe, or you're talking about trying to get into YouTube ads with a kind of commercial like stuff. And that whole world doesn't seem, it almost like radio transfers better than a
Yeah.
kind of video TV ad for a small business like ours. You right?
It
Does that
also
make
it
sense?
also for whatever reason, because I have thought about that, right? Like, yeah, in part because I'll get ads on Facebook encouraging me to put ads on Disney Plus and Hulu, and I'm like, what would
Wow.
that even look like? And I was like, that's interesting. It's an interesting idea that if somebody was streaming maybe Breaking Bad, that it
Yep.
might cut to a commercial because they don't have, but they have an ad supported plan, and they might see something about the arcade. And so I thought about that, but it feels very impersonal. Like if that does, to your point, feel very corporate, which I
Yeah.
don't ever want the arcade to become. And I think for me, that's where the tone and how I approach things, like I draw a line between that stuff.
Yeah.
And it is a fine line sometimes because you want to come across as professional, of course. But at the same time, I don't want people to forget we're a small business. I'm a
Yeah.
single owner. It's a small company. the employees that I have are amazing and have been with me for quite a while, and we're doing something really special here. I don't want people to think that we're Dave and Buster's because then their expectations are very different coming into it, and we may not meet those. And,
Yeah.
you know, I think we've had a lot of success through word of mouth, which I took from Reclaim Hosting,
Yeah.
and we've been able to build a community very organically as opposed to having to rah corporate like this is this whole thing or whatever and pretend that we're something that we're not. I don't find that very authentic, and it's not a comfortable space for me to try and be in anyway. So a long time ago I just decided I'm not gonna. Like, there are times when I write social media posts, I write in the first person. I want people to think
Yeah.
that I'm talking to them because I am. I run all of our social media. It's me
Which is
talking to
effective.
them. Yeah,
I think it's very effective. Can
Yeah,
I just throw a scenario by you though?
sure.
Okay. We're watching on HBO Max
Hmm.
episode 6 of The Last of Us or thereabouts. They find themselves in an arcade in a
Right.
kind of post-apocalyptic thing. Cut to an ad of you
Of me.
running around Fredericksburg away from zombies,
Yeah.
maybe shooting a couple, saying, "Come with me, fight the zombies," and then cut to a zombie game or something on Reclaim Arcade, and then cut back to the
Yeah.
show. What do you think?
I think it's even more compelling if we can get really targeted. All I need to do is I need to know your age, gender, where you live, what your interests are, and then I can really get targeted and reach out to those people. So as long as you sell your soul and all of your data to me, I can effectively take your money.
You become my zombie.
Exactly. Right. Is that a fair trade-off?
I think it
Maybe.
is. And I'll tell you, that's the whole thing that is interesting about streaming now. A lot of the services are depending upon ad dollars.
Sure.
Not upon, pushing up their subscription prices. But then,
Hmm.
like Amazon Prime and them is saying, we're still going to have ads that break up your watching. And
Yeah.
that's interesting. Anyway, I agree with you totally on that. But I just think it's fun because you can think of ideal moments. Like when I
Hmm.
saw that thing in The Last of Us and I finally saw that, which I guess my son was telling me is part of a DLC because I'm like, I've never seen this in the game. Um,
Yeah.
and it's actually an amazing transition to something like Reclaim hosting, Reclaim Arcade. It's amazing to think of that and then saying, "Look, we're doing that. Like we're
I love
living that retro world."
this total aside, but did you see they had a make tracks in that arcade? Like, if you look closely, there's a make tracks in there, and I was that was when I was watching it like in real time. And I'm like, I need to
What
talk to
game?
Jim about this.
I
Like,
think there was a Zaxxon in
yeah,
there too.
right, yeah.
Yeah,
So I
I
don't
I love it when
disagree.
they have those, and
Yeah.
I also think one of the things I've been having trouble with at the kind of space I'm working on right now is Maketracks has been giving me a lot of problems
Really.
with the stable monitor and the
Mhm.
board that I have. Two Crush Roller boards and two Matrix boards. How many other games do I have four boards for? It's ridiculous.
It's
Anyway,
crazy. But to your point though, like, I mean, it becomes very it's the question always becomes how do I reach people where they are, right? Which is what you're getting at, right? Like you're watching a show and then maybe there's an interest level for knowing about us as an arcade. And we can post on social media and I can, do a YouTube channel and this kind of thing and just trying to reach people in different ways. But the challenge is, like you said, with the ad supported stuff, there's a reason that companies will often promote things when you're paying a customer. So, like, if I'm paying
yeah.
for ads, then it becomes a lot easier to get that out into there. Whereas, what I might say if I'm just writing a regular post, because of the algorithms, may not show up in your feed, or you
Would you
might
had
scroll right
talked
past it.
part of this conversation is born out of when I was back in Fredericksburg recently and we were
Hmm.
chatting, and you were mentioning that. Depending on the changing algorithms, some of your stuff can get lost in the shuffle, whether
It's
it's
a
on
huge problem.
Instagram and Facebook. And why is that? Like, what's the issue at play there?
It's hard to say because they don't really have a lot of transparency in terms of how your stuff gets out here. Here's what I can tell you. We have, I believe, 9,000 followers on Facebook, and I'm lucky
Jesus.
sometimes if a post gets 15 to 20 likes. So something there is happening,
Yeah.
and certainly out of those 9,000 people, maybe several of them are not on Facebook anymore, but that's a huge sample size to have such a small impact. And it I have to fight for every eyeball to get on a post and think through it. And of course, some things hit differently than others, but if I pay to what they call boost a
Uh,
post and suddenly you've got an ad running, well, now it's getting lots of views, I think. But again, where's the transparency there? I'm getting a lot more engagement, whether that
yeah.
translates to ticket sales for some event we're doing, or maybe, whatever the case may be. But yeah, I think the algorithms and what shows up in people's feeds doesn't always align with the way I want to conduct business, right?
Yeah.
So things that
Totally.
will make people angry, things that are quick and very, simple. Um, a lot of those things where it's like consume, scroll, go on. Sure, like if I wanted to start doing ASMR videos about like, arcade button sounds, maybe that would hit, but it's not really where I want to be. It's
Good.
not how I want to promote the arcade. But that's to that point, the algorithms are trying to, define for people what they should see. And it didn't matter that they followed us. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter that 9,000 people follow us, because that doesn't guarantee that even, 10% of those are ever going to see anything that I post, because it's not in their control anymore. That entire model, when we were talking, when you were here,
Yeah.
I was watching a lot. Who's the CEO of Patreon, and I'll aside, we can understand that maybe he has a reason and an interest to promote the idea of building communities. He's the CEO of Patreon and the founder of it, right?
Sure.
So, but he makes really good points, I think, about the whole idea of the follow subscriber model falls apart when you have algorithmic feeds. And I'm seeing that in real time as a small business, that, I can post and talk and have exciting things to share. Um, but it's like, I will still have people say, I had no idea you were doing that. I had no idea you were doing that. I'm like, man, I'm trying.
Yeah.
How do I reach you? And it's a constant, that's the nut for me to crack that I haven't figured out 100%, is like, how do you continue to build that community? And that's why I've been trying, authentic ways at doing that.
So there is kind of a, I mean, from what I'm hearing, potentially with the algorithms, there's a pay to play, right? And I
Sure.
know a lot
Oh,
of people
absolutely.
like, and that is interesting because that's part of what kind of, isolated independent bands and a lot of people from the radio, right? Was you
Yeah.
couldn't really get on the radio unless you knew someone or else you gave money or whatever. And
Right.
that's a very interesting time. Like you're not getting that airtime. So one
Hmm.
of the things we chatted about, and I want to come back to several things, but I do want to come back to your videos. But one of the things we talked about was we've been using now for a while, and ironically, you're the one who I first saw anyone use Ghost, right? You
Sure.
used Ghost as a blogging platform back in like 2013, maybe earlier,
Yeah.
14, and we've been using Ghost for our newsletter and for our blog, which we started, newsletter a couple of years ago, blog more recently. And what I've been blown away by is that we have about 800 subscribers on each of them. And we get about, on the blog, 60% engagement, which we
Hmm.
can see, which means, 60% opened and maybe 40% will have clicked the link if there is one. And
Hmm.
on the newsletter, it's about 40%. And, you see who clicked where. And like, you have a clear sense of where your community is going and what they're using. And anyone can opt out.
Hmm.
But I saw now that Ghost is joining the Fediverse,
Yeah.
and you can subscribe to Ghost not via email, right? You can just follow Ghost in that post across many services, whether it's Threads, right? Whether it's Mastodon, whatever. And so I wonder if that's a brave new world potentially for managing some of those uh, I don't know how many people are on Threads. I don't know how many people.
Right.
Obviously, Mastodon is probably not your community for Reclaim Arcade. So, like,
Yeah.
what do you think about that? And you've been playing with Ghost.
Well, it's interesting because I agree. I think, when you think of academic communities, it makes a lot of sense that email would be a fantastic way to reach them, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's one of the primary forms of communication. If you're a faculty member or even a student or someone else. I also think academic communities, particularly in the ed tech realm, are more likely to be on at Mastodon, to be interested in the Fediverse and those types of things. Um, Whereas like a local community, it's sort of like, well, where does that land? People are kind
Yeah.
of everywhere. It's very fragmented. Sure, there's going to be, the geeks like me that are on Mastodon, and so like there's going to be some people there. There's going to be some people on Threads. There's going to be people on Facebook and Instagram and elsewhere. Um, so yeah, that's what I'm experimenting with and playing with. And so after our conversation, I did start a newsletter because that's new to me. Like I've been blogging with Ghost forever,
Yeah.
but they have kind of found themselves in a moment where they were building on top of this idea of subscribers and newsletter type things. And then, Substack said they were okay with Nazis and everybody left them. And they were like, hey,
Yeah.
we've got this really nice writing platform that you can also email everybody with. And it was like, oh, yeah, like they kind of felt themselves in the moment
Yeah.
where everybody wanted an email newsletter and they were right positioned there to do that. And I'm coming late to that game because I was always like, why would you want more email? I don't understand it. Like, I hate email, but for some people, that's where they live. And it might be a less intrusive way to get in front of them. I mean, I thought of a lot of stuff. I thought about like text messaging campaigns, and my wife was like, "Don't you fucking dare!" Like, and I'm like, "No, you're right. You're right." Like, I mean, it's very true, right? And nobody wants to get text messages from any business,
No.
even if they love them, And so it's just kind of like, but trying to figure out like how do I reach these people? It's a little different for us too because like I started playing with the newsletter thing. You'll find this very interesting. Of course, Ghost uses Mailgun
Yeah.
as a email provider, sort of that transactional email client. So I signed up for a new Mailgun account with my arcade address and got everything set up. I was very comfortable with things like setting up the DNS to make it all work. So that process was pretty seamless and got everything done. Imported all of our email addresses from our customers, sent out the first newsletter, and then Mailgun shut my account down. and I
Really?
was like, what's going on? And they said we had too many complaints. And I'm like, really? I said, what does that mean? And essentially, they keep track of how many people mark an email as spam. That's what they consider a complaint, is if somebody marks an email as spam, that's considered a complaint. And by too many, if it's over 0.05%, it's too many,
Oh no.
which equated to, and 2,400 emails, four people had marked it as spam and they shut my account down. I was like, what in the world? Like, I mean, like, I mean, anybody could click that for any reason,
Yeah. And
even
people will
accidentally. And
actually,
they
right?
will,
Yeah.
right? And so, if they just don't want to get the email anymore. Instead of hitting unsubscribe, they marked it as spam or something, whatever the case may be. So, like, I had to really, like, be like, explain to them, why I was sending emails. Of course, they're trying to keep spam down. They're trying to keep these shared IP addresses from ending up in spam folders. So I
Right. Which
understand the
we know the
challenge.
pain of.
Of
Exactly.
course. So I understand, where Mailgun was coming from. And they did reinstate my account. And the second newsletter I sent out, there were no complaints at all. So I think it's kind of ripping that band-aid off of what is this? I wasn't sure about
Yeah.
this or whatever. And maybe going forward, it's, we'll only end up for the people who want it. And that first email was like, all right, we'll get it all out. But it was just new to me because I was just sort of like, made me
Yeah.
second guess myself, a little bit like, is this really,
I'm a
am I right
spammer.
doing this? Or am I, yeah, like, like,
But
am I the bad guy here? I just want you to know what we have going on, but
that's awesome.
yeah,
But
I,
I wonder when you have the you know, activity pub model, it will
mhm,
make people easier to knock at that email. It will give them a choice of like
sure.
email or follow it on your favorite, Fediverse driven system, whatever that
Yeah.
is, or integrated system. So maybe that will take some of the pain off, and then you're not collecting any data which is always cleaner. But you had X amount of email addresses that people shared with you that you could then pretty much translate into a newsletter. And when
Sure.
people are telling you on Facebook, like, I don't know what's happening,
Right.
and then you're like, well, if you don't, this is one way to communicate that.
Hmm.
Did you find that you got engagement from the community, or was it kind of a wash?
It's still early days. In terms of the number of opens, I think it was somewhere around 25%, which probably isn't bad for that large
That's
of a
good.
sample size. And
Yeah,
especially keep in mind with our customer base, these emails came from, you know, point of sale type stuff rather than like in your case, they're probably very specific about signing up for a newsletter because they want to hear about it or they're a customer or
yeah.
something.
They're
The
admins
arcade,
often, which means they
sure.
have an invested interest for their job.
Right. Which is different than somebody who bought, a hot dog 2 years ago, right? So it changes a little bit. Maybe they were more than happy to be there, or maybe they weren't, you never know.
Yeah,
But a long time has passed and suddenly they get something in their inbox, and whether or not they even want to open it, whether or not the email is even valid anymore, right? And those kind of
sure.
things. So I think it's still early days. I'm definitely not giving up on it. I think it's a good chance for me to write about the arcade. Excuse me. A lot of the social media stuff I do is punctuated and short and photo heavy and everything. And it's just very like day to day type stuff. So it's fun to take that month. I try to do 1 to 2 a month and kind of just reflect and talk about what we've done, what we've got planned for the future, and those kind of things. And that's a different style of writing, and I find it really enjoyable, like blogging.
Yeah.
I don't have a blog on the arcade website, and yet anyway, and I don't know if that would make a lot of sense. This is kind of like a blog, and I like that. It's a very comfortable space for me to be in and different, and so we'll see if it hits or not.
What you need is a repair blog.
Right.
That would be cool. Like
Yeah.
just tracking them, not necessarily like you don't, but like I found that like I'm using that as an offboarding my any work I do on the arcade because I forget.
Yeah.
And I forget what I did on what machine, and so I go back and I'm using my tags to talk about okay, which machine did I work in this update, and
Yeah.
that has been helpful just on a. But that would be a logical blog, like a very
Hmm.
focused blog, or it doesn't even have to be a blog. It can be a Google Express, it can be a
Sure.
spreadsheet or whatever. But that would be a useful and
It's
fun for
it's
me. I would read it.
Well, that's the thing, and I'm sure for others they would too. There are definitely a subsection of our customers that like to hear about the challenges of running the
Yeah,
arcade and the things I'm working on and those kind of the games themselves, right?
yeah.
Whereas there might be other people who are like, I don't give a crap about that. Like,
Uh,
when is karaoke, right?
exactly. When can I sing?
Yeah,
What about now? Speaking of karaoke and singing, and it's a bad transition, but I'll do it anyway. You've been taking up weekly um, videos where you
sure.
tell people, you sing to the camera, and you tell people about what's happened, at the arcade, what's going on, what to expect. Often dealing with like beer choices or menu pieces. Like, how has that been in terms of YouTube? Because
Yeah,
we stream, and like I don't know how popular our streams are, but I find it like another form of like communal blogging, right?
yeah.
Like kind of where you can connect as a face. You're there talking, and I think whenever I see those videos, I'm compelled by them because it's you. You know what I mean?
Well, and there's something to be said for the practice, right? The routine of it all, which I really appreciate. It in some ways reminds me a lot, and this is a huge throwback to DTLT today, right?
Totally.
The idea that we would get in front of the camera is what I'm doing every week. And I apologize for my voice. I've been struggling this week with a little bit of a sinus thing or something. So hopefully you can understand what I'm saying. But
Okay, gravel boy.
yeah, right, rattling around here. Um, but yeah, like so
Do
every
you need a glass
Thursday,
of water or something? Can
I'll
I
be okay.
help you?
Garcon, come on here. But I get in front of the camera every single Thursday, and they're very short, they're about 4 to 5 minutes long, and
Yeah,
I just talk about what's coming up this week. What new food that we have, what new drinks in the fridge, what events are going on, if we have new games or if I've been working on games, I'll talk about those. And I've really appreciated the routine of that. Do we get a lot of views? I don't know. I mean, like it's not nothing and it's grown over time, but for me it's the routine of it. It's
Yeah.
also another format. It's not just another photo post on Instagram, it's a video, right? So,
Yeah.
you know, I do struggle sometimes with the balance because there's so many things I'd like to do and a lot of different places I'd like to be, and the video is yet another thing. And so I try to keep it very simple because you can get consumed with, I have to do a video on YouTube and then I have to do a photo post on Instagram. But should I turn that into a reel too with the video? And, what about Mastodon? Should I be there? And I've got an email newsletter to write. And
What
there's a
about
thousand
TikTok?
different, yeah, I know. We've done TikTok before
And
too.
you've
And
done well on TikTok.
yeah, so it's hard to know where you should be, and I mean, there's never going to be a shortage of networks and places that you can do something, and so finding which ones make the most sense. I'm only one person, and it's
Yeah.
not going to be possible to be everywhere, and so figuring out what makes the most sense. For example, one thing I'd love to do, but I just don't have the time right now, but I think it would really be amazing to is a podcast. I think
Yeah.
it would be really awesome. I meet a lot of really interesting people running this space,
Yeah.
and it would be amazing. A great example of that is somebody who donated 2 NES games to us that actually created the games.
So cool.
She's a developer up in Northern Virginia that actually decided during COVID to teach herself how to build homebrew NES games. And so, like, she gave us, like, and these are physical NES cartridges, these aren't ROMs that can be played in the arcade.
So
And I was
cool.
like, this is amazing. And I would love to have a podcast where I could talk through stories like that and with people about, things. Because there are still people who don't realize that, like, people are still making pinball machines today. There are
Yeah.
still arcade games like that. That community and that ethos is not. This isn't just nostalgia. It isn't just retro, but a lot of that still continues today. And just really interesting people. I would love to have a podcast, but it's like that'd be yet another thing, and
That's
trying to
true.
figure out the timing of it. And so
Something else would need to be caught, right? Essentially.
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. So, but yeah,
I love that
I
idea, though. I think it's a great
yeah,
idea. And, we did a little bit of that with Reclaim today. And the
right,
thing about that is it doesn't have to be, every day. It can
yeah,
be every few months or whatever. But I love
yeah,
the idea of just highlighting people who you've come into contact with who have been
sure.
interesting and have done that. I think it's a great idea. Why aren't you doing
I know exactly, right? I've got no shortage of ideas,
that?
right? I
No,
just
that's
need two or three more of me and, three times the time. But
but I
yeah,
also love one of the things you've been doing that I have found truly compelling, and it goes. I think it speaks to your experimental. You've always been a great experimental um, tech guy. Ed tech. You've done all sorts of stuff. You love to kind of play with new tools and stuff. But like you did the stream where you went to 5 different basements and and going
yeah,
between them and streamed you going to these basements to play these pinball machines, which I thought was just a brilliant stream. And then you've got the pinball tournament stream and the women flipping out stream, really locked in. And
yeah.
those are significant. Like what you've done there to take an event and make it stream worthy. That's been cool stuff. Can you talk a little bit about that? And has that paid any dividends?
Absolutely. So, like, it's interesting. So we stream on Twitch, and I have a history with Twitch because it used to be called Justin TV, and we used it for DS106 TV.
That's
Um,
right.
so, like,
That's so
that's
cool.
really cool to me. And so, but during COVID, I started watching a lot of pinball streamers, and it was a really interesting way to learn how to play a game watching somebody somewhere else play it. And I've carried that through. There's lots of tournaments that get streamed and things like that. And I'm like, man, that would be really cool to do at the arcade. Not because I was trying to reach people necessarily, but just I love a good problem. Like I
Yeah.
love something that's just like, this would be really interesting. And pinball streaming is intense because if you think about it, you've got to see the playfield. You want to see the person playing. You
Yeah.
also need to see the back box because that has the scores and in many cases a lot of the animations. So you've got three different cameras that all need to be laid out on one screen for you to be able to see everything happening at the same time. And some of the best ones will also include things like chat and other things in there. So it gets to be a real challenge. And of course, I love that challenge of it. It's like, how would you do that? And
Yeah.
so, and the community shares a lot of information. And so, one of the things that I did was I built a pinball streaming rig. And so it's made of aluminum and it's on caster wheels and it can be rolled across to a game. And it's got all the cameras mounted above and to the side to be able to watch everybody
So cool.
who's playing. And I figured out ways to send it wirelessly to another computer where somebody could be sitting and commenting and talking about those people that are playing. And so we stream all of those tournaments. I do upload them after the fact to YouTube. So I find there's some reciprocal effort there of streaming it live to Twitch, but putting it on our YouTube channel after the fact. And it's a fun thing to do. For me, I think that that's the key is trying to figure out those places where it doesn't feel like work because it's fun, right? You know, there are still some things that feel like a lot of work. And that's why, like with the podcast thing, it's like it would be fun, but right now it still feels like work to create that.
Yeah.
So I've held off on it. Whereas, like the streaming, I've gotten it dialed into a point where it doesn't feel like work anymore. The
Yeah.
weekly video that I do every Thursday does not feel like work whatsoever. It takes me less than 30 minutes to script it out, record it, post it to YouTube and Facebook and Instagram, and be done with it. And I can move on. And I do enjoy doing that. So it's finding that balance. And then you just kind of hope that, in general, it does work out that it's like when you do these little things here, 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 everywhere, that the combination of them all manages to reach a large variety of people and reach a community that might be fragmented and be in different places. And so to me, like that's been part of the answer to that fragmentation is just like, how can you reach people wherever they are? And maybe the Fediverse is part of that for sure. But how can you reach people where they are without it being pulling your hair out because you've got to be 20 different places? And I do think, that might get easier with the Fediverse and the idea of syndication and those kind of methods. And it's also just about balancing the time. How can you reuse something that you've done in multiple places in multiple different formats as well?
Yeah, I like that idea of taking that video and publishing it across 3 or 4 platforms and
Yeah.
doing that. Like we're still only working pretty much on Mastodon with our videos, sharing them there. We have
Hmm.
an archive that people can find through PeerTube. They are on YouTube, so people can
Yeah.
also find them there. But it's been a little bit of an experiment for us to play with that tool that you found early on, PeerTube, and play with the idea for us of that. We saw it early with the Reclaim, no, with the Cloudflare TV. And I think we're
Hmm.
getting to a point, and I don't think it will ever be, 24/7 like Cloudflare TV, but where
Sure.
we're doing regular kind of streams. And
Right.
they're really good, like you said with DTLT today, at creating an archive of our work. And
Yeah.
they're not only based on like, here's what Reclaim is offering. A lot of times it's like,
Sure.
how do you work with this reveal.js tool? Or what about
Right.
this open source LLM model we're playing with? There's that experiment piece to it.
Yeah.
That like for you with the streaming and for all this stuff and figuring it out keeps it fresh so that
And
you
I
don't think of it as like, oh, time to make the donuts.
Exactly, exactly. And I find that there's a lot of overlap with things too, right? So, like, a great example of that is I imagine that people are maybe commenting and talking in Discord right now. And so you've created this Discord
Yeah,
community.
that's right.
You kind of built it in as a chat tool for this, but it's also a place where people can talk with other admins. And so then it
Yeah,
becomes a space that can meet more than one demand. And
it's
I
true.
find that kind of stuff fascinating. It's a way for someone to be like, oh, I came because it was in the chat and I was wanted to talk with other people about that video. But then I found a whole community of other people talking about different stuff. And then that led me over here to do this. And so
Yeah.
it's often as you start to get these tools and try them out in different ways that you find, well, yeah, it can do that, but it can also do this and maybe that as well. And, again, there's that crossover and you hope that if they came for this, that you might be able to bring them over into here to do something else.
Yeah, this is really helpful. Like, it's one of the reasons why I wanted to have this stream with you is, you're chock full of good ideas, and you're never afraid
Please.
to play with this stuff. And I think one of the things we've been doing, I think Marin and Taylor did a presentation about this, and we'll do another one about this idea of, reclaim community, and like
Sure.
what are the different like experiments we are currently doing, whether it's Reclaim
Right.
TV, whether it's Discord, whether it's Mastodon. How are we trying to do this? And people like Pilot, Meredith, and Taylor, and then the list goes on. Marin have been really good at kind of pre-populating some of that stuff, at kind of us getting regularly into the flow. Sometimes you do miss tools like Twitter because you probably have a little bit more reach, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, our reach will never be that big. And
Right.
like, it's kind of like you said early on in this call, understanding who you are and remaining and focusing on that community. And, rather than trying to pretend, you're going to be this big, megalith who's, broadcasting to, hundreds of thousands of people versus maybe
Right.
making sense to the hundreds that
Yeah.
are kind of interested, or the tens that
Yeah.
are interested in your work and have made your community what it is. And I think that's an interesting balance. And one of the things I like about Mastodon, and Mastodon is a far from perfect tool, is that I think it keeps at least me in check. It's like,
Yeah.
200 people and maybe 5 are listening to anything I say. And that's kind of like probably what was happening on Twitter. But Twitter gave you this kind of, more of like a soapbox stand where you always
Right.
felt like you were broadcasting to all these people rather than having a conversation. And I think it's that return to conversation that I want, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that I crave.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Do you want to be a mile wide but an inch deep, or do you want to really get into the thick of it
Yeah.
with a group of people, even if it is a small group? Like, there's that sense of the idea of the super fan, right? And somebody had like
Eric
done some,
Lichtman.
yeah, well,
The
perfect
super fan.
example of one of them. Somebody had done some research a while ago, and they talked about it from the standpoint of bands and music. And they said, you don't have to have millions of fans to be a successful band and make music. You need to have, it was either 1,000 or 10,000 super fans. And super fans were the people that would go to every show. They'd buy every T-shirt. They would talk about you to their friends. They would always do that. And sure, other people would come and go, but it's like if you only, and I think it was only 1,000. They said, like, if you had 1,000 super fans, those people, you could be sustainable and have a business. And I think I keep reminding myself sometimes of that. Is like,
Yeah.
yeah, like that's that word of mouth. It's that if we can spread it far and wide, but it's like if you can build a community of people that would do anything for you, like that those people, then you can survive the hard times, and you can, like, as you try to figure out all this stuff, because they're always going to back you. They're always going to like be a fan and talk about you and be there for you. And so it's like, how do you reach those people and engage with them and continue to talk to them? Right. And then all this other stuff, it's just kind of like it filters out into that broader community.
No, that's well said. And Mark Corbett Wilson, if you're listening, and I know you are, thank you for being a super fan. And I want to say to you, Tim, I'm a super fan of yours. I buy all your
Thank you.
T-shirts. I subscribe and I smash the button. And it's been obviously a complete joy to have you back on a
This is
Reclaim
fun.
stream. In
Yeah.
many ways, you made us, and I don't know. It's just great talking to you, and a lot of you have a lot of salient points between the super fan and just also staying local and not forgetting your roots. I really like that. And I always think about that with Reclaim Arcade, because Reclaim Arcade is such a unique thing. It's so hard to scale that. Like, think
Right.
about what it would make to reproduce what you produced already with one location. Like, it's
People
not.
ask me, people keep asking me, when are you going to open a second location? I'm like, are you out of your mind?
Yeah, like, exactly. Are you kidding me? Do
Yeah.
you know what it took?
Right.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. Well, anyway, thanks for joining us. on
Oh, you're very
Reclaim
welcome.
TV today. We're a big fan, and thank you all out there for listening. We want more super fans, so please, after Tim said this, that's my new thing. Are you a super fan or not? Because if you're
There you
not a
go.
super fan, don't hit that like button. Don't subscribe, because we
Gotta
only
be for
want
life.
super fans for life. Yeah!
Yeah.